true happiness is acceptance, not exuberance.
Sure. Exuberance, that sounds a little bit much for anyone, really. Alan Ginsberg yelled at her, you can't give people drugs without telling people you're giving them drugs. So I see Zuckerberg in that gold chain. I'm like, I don't want this guy between me and my audience.
You're never going to be perfectly happy all the time. The best you can hope for is to be reasonably happy. Most of the time.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Reasonably Happy. I'm your host, Paul Ollinger. It's good to see you. My guest this week is comedian and writer Matt Ruby. The New York Times has called Matt Ruby both funny and button pushing.
Pushing those buttons.
Pushing the buttons.
Stick them out, I'll push them in.
A white male button pusher is what you
Finally,
are, Mr. Ruby.
It's about time.
He is also a former musician and former tech entrepreneur. Would you have called yourself an entrepreneur in those days?
No, more like
pioneer?
Startup involved. I guess maybe I did the video series that was kind of entrepreneurial. But
He's got an interesting background in tech that we'll touch on as well. Matt Ruby, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
How do we know each other?
I don't remember. Through online something, right?
I can't remember how we met. I thought we were on the same show in Atlanta years ago, but you swear you've never done comedy in Atlanta.
I don't think I have. I feel like we met through some online something, but I don't remember what.
Grinder is what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
Grinder. Yeah,
Well,
that's our first stupid joke of many that'll come in the next 45 minutes. Matt, we're going to start, as we do, thematically.
All right.
And I want to ask you a question. How do you define happy?
I mean, happy. I tend to skew towards Buddhist philosophy around this stuff. I think our culture is too overly obsessed with this idea of happiness as some sort of constant state. I think real happiness is more of embracing like a seasonal approach to sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad, and just trying to be present in the moment and not attached to outcomes or to how you think things are supposed to be, but accepting reality for what it is. And so that to me is a higher plane of happiness.
So you can be sad and happy all at the same time.
Yeah, well, you have to get out of these binary definitions that we have in the West, that it's either one or the other, and be like, oh, maybe happiness and sadness come together. Maybe if you're never sad, then you would never experience happiness. So maybe there are two sides of the same coin.
Or that true happiness is acceptance, not exuberance.
Sure. Exuberance, that sounds a little bit much for anyone, really. We don't have to go too far with this, do we?
Do you think do you think all exuberance is artificial?
Not all. But our culture seems to really desire it to be amped up to a point where it's, a guy on a Capital One commercial really pitching you hard on having that credit card. I'm like, I don't think he really cares that much if I have the Capital One card.
The guy with like the snazzy blazer who is preternaturally thin at middle age. And,
yeah, there's, it's a genre.
Cool.
It's an avatar. There's plenty of people that could fit into this category.
Yeah. Where do you find yourself most at peace?
I like weed a lot.
Yeah.
And mushrooms. So those things.
Why? What does that do for you?
I think like my shoulders like go down like a half inch, and I just sort of relax, and I feel like I'm a lot more in flow and in the moment, and not sort of logical and analytical and calculating, and have my brain on in this way that it's been trained to be, as opposed to just sort of like being more in flow with the universe, which I find substances help me get there.
In your non-chemically altered state, how would you describe your mental sort of stasis point?
I mean, I'm still pretty chill. I meditate a lot. I feel like, but yeah, my brain's always on. I'm going, like I'm noticing everything all the time. I'm observant, perhaps to a fault sometimes, and I just got a high circulation. I'm inputting a lot and desire to output a lot.
So in the past 36 hours, I've watched both your brand new special Bolo, which is available now on YouTube, link to which is in the show notes, and your special from 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Substance?
Yes.
Which I got to tell you, I really enjoyed from a concept standpoint.
Thank you.
In a world where everybody is figuring out how to put out a comedy special, you really came at it from a different angle. Will you just give the nickel version of how you approached it?
Substances, 4 sets on 4 different nights on 4 different substances. So one I'm high on weed, one I'm drunk on alcohol, one I'm tripping on shrooms, and one I'm completely sober. And there's different jokes in each set, and there's documentary footage leading up to that set, so you can see me imbibe and get to that point of the night. And each show kind of veers off into a random direction that winds up interesting. And, you know, spoiler alert, like I would say my favorite one was the mushroom one. Probably like the best one from a comedy standpoint is the sober one, and definitely the worst one is the alcohol one. But seeing how they all come together and sort of the I don't know, the interplay between me and then there's other comics who I talked to along the way, and some of the documentary footage,
including Mr. Mark Normand, who is becoming pretty famous.
That's true. Yeah,
your buddy Gary Veter.
Gary Veter's in there.
The Upper West Side Newark Comedy Club.
That's right. Andy Haynes, Shane Torres, a bunch of other funny cats are in there too. But so and I like it because it's, you know, it's got a little bit of like almost like a Super Size Me kind of like I'm experimenting on myself.
It's like a human experiment.
Yeah. So there's definitely, and it was very weird to put out something, you know, it's like I'm producing a documentary on myself, which is already weird. And then it's me doing something I want people to think I'm good at, but it's me not doing it well frequently in this. And like kind of, that was a whole sort of interesting dynamic too of like, okay, you know, I want to, you know, that I think part of it has to go, or it doesn't have to, but part of it doesn't go well, but I think that's good filmmaking. But it was painful for me in the moment.
I think I know which part you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's the part where you're extremely intoxicated on
I was
alcohol.
like blackout drunk. Yeah.
I
didn't remember what I said.
What was your BAC before you? Because you had a breathalyzer.
Yeah, I can't even remember. It was like 0.14 or something. It was definitely
and you kept drinking after that.
Yeah, they brought me drinks on stage, and then amazingly enough, however bad it was on stage, I somewhat held it together because then you see footage of me as soon as I get off stage, I can't even talk.
Yeah,
like I'm just like speaking like gibberish
on stage.
Yeah, I almost fell off the stage.
And then as you get off, you fall up the stairs, leaving the club.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, that was a vulnerable thing of you to allow yourself to be filmed in that state because you were fucked up.
Yeah, well,
and it's not the most flattering version of any of us when we're drunk.
Well, I think in my own defense, I knew I was filmmaking. So like I wouldn't.
I'm not looking for you. That's the thing.
Well, in my own head, it helps me to defend it because I felt like. But it wasn't. I felt bad afterwards. Like I had broken some contract with the audience that I had been like on.
Oh, it's not a good. It's not a good. Like, it's a terrible set.
Yeah, I had like abused. I had abused the trust between audience and performer, and I felt guilty about that afterwards. But then I had to remind myself, well, look, you're making a film here, and this is part of it. And like, I didn't want to just have a drink or two and then call it, you know, some experiment. I wanted to go for it, and I did, and that's what happens. And so you got to accept, you know, the result.
Was there any part of you that was like, if people see this, they're going to think this is who I am as a comic? That one set,
or just think I'm bad? Yeah, I mean, like if I see someone who's hammered get up on stage, I'm like, well, this guy's probably not good, right?
Even though it was clear that you planned it. And that this was part of a
no one in the room knew what it was happening until the host brought me on stage.
Right.
So,
and you're doing like 15-minute sets in each of these? 20?
Like 20, something like that. We edited it down, but around 20.
Wow, that must have been a long 20 to be that drunk on stage.
They gave me the light and I didn't get off, and they had to take me off the stage.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I thought I was killing. That's the worst part. I thought I was doing great, which to me is like, if you want to take away from it, is like how much like alcohol, when it comes to ego, like alcohol is just like building you up and puffing you up, and I'm doing great and I don't care what anyone else thinks. And then the mushroom set, I think part of why it's good is like the ego totally comes down. It's like, hey, we're in this together. How are you guys doing? What can we build together in this moment? So yeah, it was to me like, I already knew alcohol was like fucked up, but it was like a wake up call of just like how specifically alcohol is like this dangerous drug and what it does to you.
Were you drunker than you were high, or drunker than you were tripping? Like on a if you were to graph your degree of intoxication by substance?
Probably, because if I was on like a heroic dose of mushrooms, I might not have been able to even like figure out how to get on stage
together, right?
Sort of thing. The weed, I was probably close, but I'm just like, I'm used to weed in a way that like you can give me a lot of weed and I'm still pretty coherent. So it's just alcohol has a way of getting through your defenses.
Do you perform under any of these milder doses of any of these
Not
substances?
typically. So once in a while, like, I have a little bit of weed before I go on stage, but and I don't, it can be sometimes be fun for like generating material or being in flow or like chatting with the crowd, but I find it bad for like, if you like, I have some jokes that require precision or a certain like word choice and rhythm and stuff like that. And, if I'm not sober, like that can start to slip a little bit. And then, all of a sudden a joke that worked isn't working.
I used to partake a little bit before shows, and I've had a few evenings where, I had one drink more than I should have, or an edible kicked in that I didn't think was going to kick in, and I don't like that feeling at all.
Yeah, there's sometimes there's like a little bit of loss of control, and you're like,
say the words, say the words, say the words. What did you learn from that whole experience? Besides what you've already revealed?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's come up already. I think, I don't know. I guess what I'm proud of is that like the sober set is, I think, the best set from a pure comedy standpoint. And I think there's something in there that isn't seen a lot of times in comedy specials, which is, I went up at a crowd that was it wasn't a particularly hot show. The crowd's like which you don't usually see at comedy special tapings. This is a crowd that's just a normal club show on a Wednesday night, and they were doing fine. It was just a mediocre kind of vibe in the room. And by the end of the set, I felt like I really had them and I was killing. And I don't think you see, which to me is sort of like a cool, club comedy showcase thing, New York City sort of
more
thing. More
representative of real comedies.
And you don't see it a lot depicted on screen or in specials that much of like going up in a cold room and working and getting them. And then by the end, killing and having that sort of journey. And to me, I'm like, I think that's something that doing enough reps in New York City on random shows that you get of like, hey man, it doesn't matter where they're at right now. Go up and get them and bring them with you. And I feel like that's, in my head, that's just always good motivation instead of being like, oh, it's a shitty crowd, it's not going to go well or something like that. To be like, your job is to go in there and get them and take the show to where it should be, and that you should be good enough as a comedian to do that. And I like that it shows that, and then I like sort of having that idea in my head just in an ongoing way whenever I'm performing or wherever I'm performing.
Was it a relief to perform sober in front of the camera after
so much
3 weeks of being hammered, being intoxicated?
For real, yeah. I was very much. First of all, the week after the alcohol one, I was kind of freaking out. Like I was like, oh, what am I doing here? This is bad. I'm paying money to film myself be bad at something I want the world to think I'm good at. Now there's so much pressure on this next one to go well. And then after the mushroom one did go well, I was like, okay, well, now we've got a good film. There's like some shit that's fucked up, some that's explanatory, some that's documentary, some that's like trippy. Now let's go out and do the thing that I actually do all the time, which is go up and perform sober and tell jokes that I know are good. And and then kind of the director kind of pushed me to like have some way to like connect everything that happened before that, and I think that came out well. So yeah, I felt good about it.
I think the sequence in the arc of the, like starting out with the weed and then going to the train wreck that was the alcohol set, and then sort of the beauty of the mushroom set, and then closing with the, like, oh, he's good, he knows what he's doing, he's healthy. All that was sort of like there was this redemption at the end.
Thank you.
That was satisfying.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I agree, and I think it's interesting too. Something like that annoys me about like our technology culture, YouTube or stuff like that, is like, I think we made something really good, but it's like you got to kind of stick with it.
100%.
It's not necessarily for our like ADHD like swipe brains, and it's like I think it's like a special, like a lot of people just watch the first 10 minutes of specials and then like turn it off or like think I got it or something like that, whereas this is definitely much more of a ride, and there's almost like a narrative arc to it. And so I think I like, because we've done screenings of it too, and I'm always like appreciative when people actually sit and watch the whole thing and go on the ride with it. I think it's much more illuminating than if you just watch, if all you do is watch like the first 5 or 10 minutes, you kind of don't know what's going on.
There's no, you don't save the cat in the first 3 minutes,
right.
And there's no explosions at all,
right.
Except for the drunk set. That was kind of an explosion. You're a jack of all trades, like we've talked about before. What'd you want to be when you were a kid?
When I was a little kid, an actor. And then once I hit like high school or college, I wanted to be a rock star, and
tried to be, right?
Yeah. I was in a band for 7 years in Chicago. Plastics Hi-Fi was the name of the band.
How much traction did you guys get?
We put out a few albums that were well reviewed, and
This is early 90s?
late 90s, early 2000s, indie rock, like sort of power pop, psychedelic flavored rock and roll in Chicago.
Adjacent.
We never actually played with Wilco, but Jeff Tweedy's wife owned Lounge Shacks, the venue that we played at frequently, and she put us in a soundtrack and opened up for Death Cab for Cutie and Granddaddy and Black Rebel Motorcycle Club and
cool.
Bands that like people in that scene might know about.
Yeah.
And toured around like Midwest and East Coast a little bit, and so had a some amount of success, but I don't think we were ever we were the theme song for the Chicago Blackhawks one year and all their commercials, and but nothing. I think we made good albums that I think were interesting. I don't know if we were ever like a great live band in the way that like I remember going to see the White Stripes, and first time there was like 20 people in the room, and then they came back to town like 3 months later. Everyone who was at that show came back and brought like
10
5 friends.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think we were ever that good live, which I think at that, this is before internet, Spotify, music blogs, or anything like that. I think that's what it took to really like break through, and I don't think we ever were bringing it live in that way, but we made really like interesting sort of psychedelic albums with lots of layers and freaky stuff going on, and I think I'm proud of the music that we recorded for sure.
How does your experience as a musician inform your expectations of a career in comedy?
Well, I mean, things I like about comedy is being in a band's like being married to 3 other dudes, so it's a lot of a difficult thing to sustain. Yeah, it was the original polycule, I guess. But like
we're gonna have to put a definition of polycule in the.
Let's just not go there. But so I think comedy is nice because you can do it on your own. It's a very nice feature. You don't have to carry equipment everywhere in order to perform. Those things are very nice. You can have an idea that day and go up on stage and try it that night, as opposed to writing a song could take months and lots of practicing with your bandmates. So all those are things that I kind of appreciate about comedy. And but I think, to me, like, I mean, I'm a Jewish guy, but like my original religion in my mind is rock and roll, and this idea of like how you approach life, and that things should be a little bit raw and a little rough and a little bit edgy, and but also at the same time you can have beauty and pretty melodies and stuff, and trying to tell the truth and no bullshit, and not caring what the man thinks, and putting stuff out into the world on your own, and all those things are sort of like philosophies that I've carried through in how I do comedy, or pretty much everything in my life, or when I'm trying to like go back to like, do I want to do something or not, like in the back of my head is like, is this rock and roll or not? And I mean that as like a philosophy, not necessarily as a type of music.
You say rock and roll, you just mean honest and real, authentic.
3 chords and the truth, or whatever. It was the old punk rock sort of theory, which I wasn't like a big punk rock guy, but like what can you make that no one else can make? And it doesn't matter how like fancy or complicated it is. It's like, is it true, and is it good? And like and even if it's a little raw or rough, that's fine. In fact, that's almost a little better, and almost like this. The Japanese have a concept called wabi-sabi of like, when things are a little bit imperfect, that's even better, because that's the part that's making it you. That's your fingerprint. Like, if there's a crack in a vase, that's not a problem. That's making it, that's part of the poetry of the object. Yeah, wabi-sabi, baby.
What led you to become employee number 1 of a startup that got pretty big eventually?
Well, I was a web designer at the time, which was a thing. This is before Squarespace, so I was making websites because it was like this brand new thing that no one really knew how to do. And
what
you could
year
be
was
like,
this?
Probably started in like 1997 or something like that. And it was nice because you could be like a young kid and just figure stuff out and get paid and get work. And there was no one to be like, I've been doing this 20 years. You're doing it wrong, kid. It was just sort of like wide open. And so I was doing that, working at a small company, building websites, and hooked up with another guy named Jason Fried, who was also at the time in Chicago designing websites and doing cool stuff. And then we started working on projects together, and then he partnered up with another couple guys, and I was employee number 1 at 37 Signals, which was started off as a web design company, and then we made something to track projects with clients. And the clients that we worked with were like, hey, we'd pay you to use this thing. This is great for tracking projects. So we were like, oh, let's turn this into a product, which became Basecamp, which then became, one of the first, big software as a service things. And I was doing more like design and media stuff there. And, but eventually it started growing and became bigger, and we wrote books and did other stuff. And it was an interesting ride, and really smart guys to work with. It was like they were, really like devoted 100%, while as I was also in a band at the time, and kind of like, oh, this is my job, and then here's my art that I'm also working on.
Did you have to choose at some point?
I don't know. I feel like it's tough to have divided passions, and so I do think at some point, eventually I got into comedy, and I was able to make Vuza, a show that was making fun of the tech world and startup life, and that felt a bit of like a unification of like, oh, I might not be like the smartest person in tech, and I might not be the funniest person in comedy, but maybe I'm the funniest person in tech, and if I can make this show that's making fun of the tech world and speaks to people in that scene in a way that they've never seen themselves reflected, and is funny and good, and I'm pulling in all kinds of talented people from like the New York comedy scene, and they're making stuff that's good too. I could make something unique and maybe like bring together two different sides of me into one thing, because I do think it's tough over the course of a lifetime to be like, oh, I'm really good at this and I'm really good at this, and have all of them work. Like, I think at some point, it's nice to focus and narrow down instead of being a jack of all trades.
Right.
Although I will say now, I feel like with the internet and stuff, that's sort of reversed too, where it's like, maybe it's better now to have, maybe it's better to be a podcaster and a comedian and an MMA analyst and a weed smoker and a hunter. Oh, well, just to give an example of like, I think it used to be you had to pick one of those. And now we've embraced this idea of like, all facets of a person's personality can be represented in what they do, which I think in a lot of ways is really cool.
You're referring, of course, to Call Her Daddy.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I struggle with that. Like, I feel like, I write, I do comedy, I do the podcast, which was designed or conceived to sort of build the Paul Allinger platform so that I could do more comedy.
The brand of you.
I do some corporate speaking. That hasn't been the result, but at the same time.
Well, what hasn't been the result?
Like some huge platform that helps me sell tickets all over the country.
Sure.
It has introduced me to people I never would have met, kept me in touch with people that I wouldn't be in touch with, got me into corporate gigs that I never even thought about trying to pursue, that kind of thing. So it's led to good shit. But I wonder if I was just doing like just writing on the Substack, just doing the podcast, or just doing comedy, would one of those things pop?
I think what helps a lot is being like a first mover on one of those platforms.
100%.
So if you're like Jason Kottke with a blog, you could be like writing about all the kinds of different stuff, which I don't know you could do today. You could be Joe Rogan at the dawn of podcasts
100%.
And be doing all this different stuff. Now you're probably much more likely to be like a niche.
The people that were cranking out reels during COVID are the people that are really putting out good reels and building a platform during COVID. Are now selling out all over the country,
and that's why you should sign up for Blue Sky.
That's exactly
this message brought to you by Blue Sky.
I think even that. I mean, I was on Blue Sky 9 months ago, and unless you already have a bunch of followers, there was a guy who has a much bigger podcast than me that followed me, and I was like, "Hey, man, you don't know me, but thanks for the follow." And he was like, "I'm basically following everybody that we both follow." And
interesting.
He was actually the person that spoke at that Reason thing we went to.
Okay.
So the day after, or like 2 days after that event, Reason.com is a libertarian-ish magazine.
Yeah.
Sure. It doesn't mean that we want to take, all your rights away, by the way. Just
I think it's the opposite, right?
Yeah, well, it also doesn't mean that everything should be permitted. But, at least for me. All right. So I think libertarian has a bad rap.
The brand isn't killing it right now, but like anything that isn't some radical partisan extreme thing, anything nuanced seems to be suffering right now.
True.
Anyway.
That's true. Anyway, I agree with you that if you're an early adapter on some of these platforms, that you have a disproportionate chance to succeed,
and to
over
be
somebody
your
that
whole
has
self too. I think
anybody who joins 2 years later is fucked.
Yeah.
You're not.
Well, that's why I've been going heavy on Substack. I have like a few newsletters that I do, and like that's part of why I'm like, I do think it, first of all, go somewhere where you like doing it. I like writing and like I'm good at it. So like, but also because of what you're saying is like, oh, I think that there's something bubbling up there that's cool and you can get paid. And I don't want to rely on these platforms owned by these like evil billionaires like in the future. And I love like owning the audience, and like there's lots of things about it that I like, and part of why I've been like, you know, devoting a lot of effort into like building Substack stuff.
So, and you're on Punch Up Live, which is the comedy version of Substack, basically, where you're building a direct relationship with your fans so that you don't have to buy Facebook ads to
the
try
middleman.
to amplify.
I see Zuckerberg in that gold chain. I'm like, I don't want, I don't want this guy between me and my audience. I'm like,
bro, it's all good. It's all good.
Or the algorithm. I'm sure the algorithm has my best interests at heart. However, I would like to be able to reach people directly.
Has your best interest at heart. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Doesn't it always? As both a consumer and a content creator.
Oh, of course, yes. Here, have you considered hating this?
Yeah.
We found this thing that you might hate, so we brought it to you. It reminds me of like my cat when I was growing up used to like kill a bird or a rat and then leave it on the doorstep and be like, hey, I brought this for you. Like, oh, thanks. I appreciate that's what the algorithm is to me. Thanks for leaving this dead rat on my doorstep.
Of my junk.
I do hate it. You're right.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by your parents. Nice segue. I got. Will you tell the story that you told about your mom in your mushroom set?
Okay.
You know the one to which I'm referring.
Sure. I mean, my mom was like lived a very bohemian life in New York in the late 50s and 1960s in the bohemian sort of underground art scene.
Where did she?
She's from New York City,
she grew up here.
Lower East Side. Yep.
Okay.
And she was living in the same house as the Velvet Underground on Ludlow Street in Lower East Side. She actually dated Angus MacLeese, who was the original drummer in the Velvet Underground, and they went and hitchhiked throughout Europe and the Middle East together in the mid-60s and came back. Man. Yeah, hung out with like Leonard Cohen in a cave in Greece and listening to the Beatles album when it came out. Came back. He joined up with Lou Reed and Sterling Morrison and John Cale, and they were performing as the Velvet Underground. He eventually quit the band because he thought they were too commercial. And he refused to let anyone tell him when he could start or stop playing drums, which can be problematic for a drummer in a band.
Sure.
But they were all into like Lamont Young and these like 30-minute like silent, you know, avant-garde freak out things. And but yeah, in the process of, I knew that about my mom. I didn't know the week before I was taping, I decided to look up. I'd found a flyer that my mom made. She used to do these art happenings in New York City in the 60s and called Rights of the Dream Weapon, and one of them was at 85 East 4th Street, which I remember, like, that address sounds familiar, and then I realized that's the New York Comedy Club where I have a show called Good Eggs, and I perform every Wednesday night there, and where I filmed the special. And so as I was looking that up the week before I filmed the special, I found this quote from Sterling Morrison where he was talking about, who's the guitar player from the Velvet Underground, talked about bumping into Lou Reed and John Cale on the street one day and being like, oh, we should perform at this event that's going on. And that was Rights of the Dream Weapon, which was at 85 East 4th Street. And the first time the Velvet Underground ever performed together as a group was in that building that I also recorded my Substance special and where I perform every Wednesday night. And so, like,
do you think there's some greater force at work there, or is that just such randomness and coolness that that happens in New York City?
Well, also my dad used to hang out at Comedy Cellar because he's from Israel, and it was like sort of like an Israeli Middle Eastern nightclub back in the day. And he lived in the West Village and used to hang out there. And so I think, to me, it's something about a testament to New York City. New York City, downtown, Bohemia, like, we talked about rock and roll, you have like CBGB's being right there and like right in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Bob Dylan, the movie just came out, being in Greenwich Village and all that stuff bubbling through those streets and those rooms. And also the owner of that building at 85 East 4th Street, and Noam, who owns the Comedy Cellar building, people maintaining a little bit of that flavor, not just selling out to some condo developer or some hotel group or something like that. And you still have that bubbling through New York City in a way that, like, I think is part of what is keeping the city at least somewhat cool in a way, and a little bit more rock and roll than anywhere else in America, at least, and keeping that energy going. So to me, it's like almost like yes, it's a coincidence, but it's also sort of like a testament to New York City, and probably why I eventually came back here in some way too, or was attracted to it. It's like there's a pulse for like art and rock and roll and making cool stuff that happens here.
Everything has happened here. I mean, for hundreds of years. Like, did you see the Apprentice movie?
I didn't.
Oh, I think it's fantastic.
Okay.
And regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, although I can see how some people might find it annoying, that's fine. Jeremy Strong, is that his name?
Yep.
As Roy Cohn, phenomenal.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is it made me look up where his office was on East 68th Street. And I was like, I've walked by that place a bunch.
Yeah.
And it's like every day in New York City, you're walking down the street past shit. You're not even aware of the history that's happened. And
totally.
In Velvet Underground, as cool as it is, isn't the most important thing that ever happened in New York City. But it's so emblematic of the city itself.
It wasn't even the most important thing to my mom. It wasn't.
Right.
I came home from college one day and I was listening to the Velvet Underground. She walks into the room and she's like, "Is that Lou Reed?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, I used to live next to him." I'm like, "What? I didn't know this." Because
Did it lose its flair once you decided?
No, my mom was cooler than I'll ever be. So it's like it didn't like, but like and it makes sense because how are you going to tell a 12-year-old like, "Yeah, I used to bang the drummer in the Velvet Underground"? Like, well, what does that mean to me, Mom? I didn't know anything. So I think as I got older, I started to process her life before she had me, and like. Then she started telling me more stories of like Alan Ginsberg and her at a party, and she put out pot brownies and didn't tell people there was pot in them. And Alan Ginsberg yelled at her, "You can't give people drugs without telling people you're giving them drugs." So imagine getting
Alan Ginsberg yells at you
if you're getting a moral lecture from the guy who's like is the champion of the Man-Boy Love Association or whatever. You've really gone off the rails here a little bit. But yeah, so and then I've written things about my mom before, and then like I wrote that story about Alan Ginsberg, and then some guy contacted me. He was like, "I knew your mom. I had a huge crush on her. She threw that party for me. I was there. Do you want to talk about it?" And so then I might have to do like a show about my mom at some point because I have a bunch of her poetry, and different people have reached out to me through the years, just reading stuff I wrote. It's like, by the way, I knew your mom, and I dated her, and then she left me for Gregory Corso, and like all this other stuff. I'm just like, okay, like my mom passed away, so there's no one to really talk to about it now. But
that's wild.
In part, she passed away, and that's when I wrote something about her that then other people who have then Googled her, looked for her, found, and reached out to me. So there's just interesting sort of branches that crawl off that.
How'd she meet your dad?
My dad became a lawyer, but before that was a reporter for Women's Wear Daily and wrote a story on my grandmother who had her own line of evening wear, Eve Stillman lingerie. This is back like in the 60s, the kind of stuff they wear on Mad Men before they go to bed, like robes and petticoats and gowns.
I love me a
slips.
Love me a petticoat.
And at the end of the interview, my grandmother said to my dad, you should meet my daughter. She's learning how to type and she's seeing a therapist."
Hilarious.
And my mom, who had just been arrested for drug possession in New Mexico and returned to New York after not talking to her mother for a couple of years, but was living with her in their apartment. And so I think my grandma was like, "Hey, can you take this girl out of my apartment? She's like crazy, but she can type,
What kind of
if she commits suicide, she'll write her own notes. So you'll have that at least,
What kind of drugs did she have on her when she was arrested?
I think that was weed possession. Yeah.
That used to be a thing.
Yeah, 60s.
Illegal. Yeah. Your dad was in the IDF, is that correct?
Yeah. He was a tank commander in the Israeli military, and then after that left and came to America and went to school and became a prosecutor here and had a whole adventure of his own.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And what on what level?
He was like an assistant DA in Manhattan, like working with Giuliani, and then worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District, and like prosecuted.
Chuck Rhodes.
So same arena, but before that, but yeah, I was doing like racketeering stuff and RICO cases and then went into private practice, and was also a reporter before that. And so had but yeah, my mom was like this avant-garde bohemian hippie smoking weed in the house. And my dad was a prosecutor putting like mob guys in jail.
Was your mom Jewish also?
Yes.
So what was the Israel type mentality in your home?
My dad loved America more than anyone I've ever met in my life, was super excited to get out of Israel, didn't care much about going back. And I will say though, it was so baked into him that like as far as like Jewish stuff, at least, like he didn't want to go to synagogue or care about it all, but he knew every single story, knew every single prayer, knew more about Judaism than any like American person I've ever met. So like, it's sort of like, even whether you choose it or not, once it's baked into you, I think it was there all along. But he was, I think, proud of Israel, but like also, you got to remember he also grew. So his family was in, what was then Palestine for generations and stuff. So like all these people like they should go back where they came from. It's like, I don't know. My dad's family lived in Israel for like hundreds of years. Like, where do you want them to go back to? So my point is like during that era, there was much more like Arabs and Israelis just living together in a peaceful, for the most part, situation, or getting along. And then, in his youth is when, Israel formally got created, and, the problems began, although there was problems before that. But he always had a lot of affinity for Palestinian people and felt bad for the situation that they were in. And like, I think always was just like, yeah, this is a super like fucked up situation here, and I think he loved Israel and was proud of it, but wasn't, super gung-ho about all the things that, I imagine now he would not be super gung-ho about all the things the government is doing there.
Have you had to edit yourself as a comic around the Israel-Palestine stuff?
I've tried to make a point of speaking about it. So maybe almost the opposite of being like, I don't think it's something to not talk about. I don't like the idea that anything shouldn't be talked about, especially on stage, and especially if like I'm a New York City Jewish comedian telling jokes in front of New York City crowds. Why wouldn't I talk about it? But that said, I do think it's like if you want to have a mindful conversation about it, it's a lot of nuance and a lot of historical context is involved. And I kind of hate the dialogue online that goes around it. And like, I think it's really like simplistic and childish. And like, the joke that those CAPTCHA things where you have to spot like the traffic light before you can log in. Mm-hmm. I feel like before you can post anything about Israel and Gaza, you should have to point them out on a map.
Right.
and if you can't do that, you just shouldn't be allowed to post your opinion about what happens there, because I think that would save us like a lot of trouble. And so that's my take. So I have some jokes about it, and I think they're not like overly political, and sometimes more about like really underneath it is sometimes some generational issues that I might have with how people talk about stuff nowadays. But
you mean the young kids, the kids?
Yeah. Not to show up and do bits, but like
do a bit, man.
Well, this is a bit that I like because it's making a point that I care about, which is I start off talking about Leonardo DiCaprio's new girlfriend, who's 19, and how much everyone online is furious about it because her frontal cortex isn't even fully formed yet. It's gross and disgusting. She's going to regret all of this in 10 years. And I'm like, wow, that is gross. Her frontal cortex isn't even fully formed yet. But then the rest of my timeline is a bunch of 19-year-olds telling me how to feel about Israel and Gaza and the election and transgender issues and climate change. And I'm like, well, they're making some good points. But then again, frontal cortex not fully formed yet. They could regret all of this in 10 years. So now I just have the same policy as rental car companies. I'm like, get back to me when you're 25.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good policy.
So like, to me, that's all right. Am I talking about like Israel and Gaza in that joke? Kind of, but I feel more what I'm talking about is like people who don't really know what they're talking about, having strongly held opinions and inflicting them upon the rest of us. And that, so I always try to be mindful about what is the target of this joke, if there is one. And I wouldn't just attack people on.
Well, plenty of people would take that the wrong way, but then fuck them. Right. Yeah.
It's a good joke. So like to me, I'm also like, that's the refuge of like, make it funny. Like if it's just you giving like a lecture, then it's like, all right, now, well, I disagree with this political point you're making. It's like, I don't know, I told a good joke. We'll all get over it.
No, but I think that this is one of the, this issue has been kind of the flashpoint of that exact societal or generational trend, which is we have the tools now to be able to say whatever we want at scale and to shame other people based on what is fashionable as opposed to what is informed. And there is no issue around which emotions are more highly charged than Israel v. Gaza.
And you can get like a bunch of likes or follows or whatever you want if you like give people some red meat for their cause, and they can put it in their group chat and be like, yeah, this guy said what we're all thinking. And like, I'm like, okay, but that's like dangerous incentives are set up. Which to me are not always great for comedy. Like oh, now you've got your following, which is this, we've seen this with like vaccine stuff or other things where it's like, oh, you did taking this political approach in this direction work for you, and then you're like, oh, let me keep doing that more and more, and now you're just sort of like becoming like a spokesman for some political tribe or something.
Paint yourself into a corner with audience capture.
Which to me is not like, I'm much more of like a Carlin disciple of like, I shouldn't know where you're going to wind up on an issue until you tell me. Like, or Bill Burr, I think, is great at this. Like, I want, like, at the essence of comedy is surprise. If I already know every single opinion and take that you're going to have before you even say it, it's tough for me to see you being a great comedian.
You've written at some point, because I read your shit and seen your specials and see you perform and all that kind of stuff, but at some point you say you pass for woke. Because of how you present yourself, you're like woke adjacent, or you identify as woke.
I have people in my life who are more either libertarian or Trump, not full on MAGA, but at least Trump supportive, and they tend to like view me as some sort of like, they can throw all their like. Everything they want to say to like the libs of TikTok, they're like, look, you're the closest I have in my life, so I'm going to give it to you.
But that's not necessarily what you are. You just sort of
not at all. But
you appear that way because you're a New York City guy who wears a cool hat.
Well, I'm just like I argue. First of all, I'm probably more of a centrist than anything, which I'm like. So I don't like when
pick a side, Matt.
I don't like when I can just smell your timeline from your political opinions. You know what I mean? Like some people just start talking to me. I'm like, I know you read the New York Post and the Daily Wire, and like I'm worried about your information sources. Yeah, that's how I wind up feeling when I'm talking to people a lot. It's not like I agree with you politically. Like probably underneath it all, we agree on a lot of stuff. I'm worried about who is telling you what you to think. And I like that is a lot. And so I think, I'm a supporter of the New York Times, which everyone seems to hate.
Yeah.
No one seems to think the New York Times is doing a good job. And it's like, I get that. But also, who's doing a better job? Who do you think is actually out there doing real reporting?
Working on
stories.
The Post is.
Working on stories for like 6 months and investigating stuff and printing corrections and is liable if they get things wrong and has bureaus around the world. Like, who else is doing? Like, I'm not saying they get everything right, but I'm saying it's good. I also believe in objective journalism. I like it when people pretend to be objective. I like when people pretend to be happy and not disordered. I want everyone to start performing more. I'm in favor of pretending, and everyone's out here like, I'm just going to be authentic. And I'm like, I wish you wouldn't. I wish you would pretend to be like someone who's functional and objective and just like a little more lubricant in society so we can all get along instead of everyone be like, I just am who I am. I'm sitting there be like, well, I wish you weren't.
Tell me about your beef with land acknowledgements. And yes, this is me playing Byron Allen on Comics Unleashed.
No, I think I don't.
Because I think that's that demonstrates your point here.
Well, like land acknowledge.
First of all, we got to tell people what a land acknowledgement is.
A land acknowledgement is when a white person goes on stage and apologizes to Native Americans for us stealing their land.
Right.
And I
just want to say, here we are in Manhattan on the tribe of the Manhattan Indians or whatever they were.
I acknowledge the Cherokee tribe that originally were the custodians. And I just imagine being a Cherokee person in the room whenever that happens, being like, yeah, are you giving me the land back right now? Or if not, what is this whole, I just want you to know that I know that we, whoopsie sort of thing. And the way I always think about it is like imagine I stole your Jeep. And then like years later, I drove up to your front door and honked the horn. I was like, yeah, I just want to acknowledge what an incredible job you did changing the oil. You kept the tires inflated. I couldn't be driving your Jeep to the beach today if it wasn't for your custodianship. And you'd be like, are you giving me the Jeep back? I'd be like, no, it's my Cherokee now.
That's right.
Sorry, Cherokees. Yeah, whoops about that. But yeah,
you'll get a casino for your for your troubles.
But that's like, I guess, an anti-liberal, like, if you really, I hate all this like I just don't I don't like bullshit.
It's an anti-hypocrisy.
I'm anti-bullshit. I'm anti-hypocrisy. I don't care what side it's coming from. If you're full of shit, I think you're full of shit. And the idea that I have some tribe that I belong to where I have to ignore when people are full of shit is something that I can't process. Like, that's against my internal compass to be like, well, he's full of shit, but he's on my side, so it's okay. I'm like, no, my side's not. My side is anti people who are full of shit.
Yeah, yeah. How do you define success in comedy?
I mean, I think there's some baseline. If we can zoom out to like how much
we can, because this is a podcast.
Nice,
and
nice.
I'm paying him to produce it.
We got
He's
5 more
kind enough
hours
to do it. We can do whatever we want.
Well, you have like the how much money do you need to make thing. And I think there's some number, which you might know better than me, being the money guru, of like 70,000 or something, which maybe New York doesn't apply, but there's some amount, maybe inflation. Let's go up to 80,000 now, where like that level above and beyond, your happiness levels don't actually increase. So I think
that's a theory that is
been
to some degree, it's certainly been challenged, if not actually debunked. But I think there's under the point which you wake up, or up to the point, if you wake up and think about money and how little you have every day, your life sucks.
Yes.
But if you can, but if you've got a car that works, if you need a car, and you're not worried about paying your rent, even if you're not living extravagantly, you don't have to sweat existential shit on a daily basis.
I'm a big Maslow guy. So like, can we get the bottom rungs of the pyramid covered?
Check 1 and 2 off.
Let's get that done.
Yeah.
So this applies to, so let's go back to your question about what's success in comedy. Some amount of income coming in where you're not like scrambling to pay for meals and rent and stuff like that. So I think that's like a base level that we all desire. Then I think it's great to be able to, like, I would love to be able to like sell out club weekends. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm destined
on the road or
yeah. Because I do the road sometimes, and I wish I like, it's a crapshoot. Like, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's like, oh, this is kind of depressing.
You've got 20,000 subscribers on Substack, don't you?
Yeah.
Does that sell tickets?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, like I don't know, certain cities probably better than others,
Right.
But
not in Tulsa.
Yeah. But like, so I think it's so okay. I also don't think I'm ever destined to be like an arena act.
Right.
Like, I also know what I make and who likes it, and this is so okay. For success, I think it's good to know what you're trying to make. I think food is a good analogy. Are you trying to be a Michelin star restaurant, or are you trying to be like Arby's or Wendy's and have like a fast casual chain that's popular all over the place? Because those are two different versions of success.
Which comedians would you compare to Arby's? Come on, let's throw out some names.
I'm not going full Jeselnik on you here. Come on, I don't have enough. I have enough Netflix cash in the bank for that. Use your imagination.
What do you try? I know. What are you trying to make?
I think I'm trying to run a Michelin star restaurant here. Mm-hmm. So I know that I'm not for everyone, and I know it's a little boutiquey, but I think the people who do get it and like it should like really be into it and want to support you and feel like you're saying something that they can't get somewhere else, and also being funny and being proud of what you make. I think, I mean, the biggest form of success, I think, is like whatever you're doing, that you're proud of it, and that, like, the parts that you control, that you're like, I did what I could to make this thing really good, and I'm proud of what I made. And like, again, going back to the Buddhist stuff of like, you gotta, like, you want the outcome to be great, but that's beyond your control. So you can't get attached to like, I need the same level of success as this person, or I need to sell this many tickets or else I'm a failure. I think it's like the parts that you can control are like how hard you work and what you make and what you put out there, and feeling proud of what it is that you release. And then like from there, like, the chips might not always fall where you want them to, but I also think there's like, can you sustain? Like, keep making good stuff, and can you keep sustaining? Because especially in comedy, but I think in show business in general, it's like careers are long. There's a whole arc to them. Some people pop later than others. It's there's no one path that like, and some people pop early and then they burn out, and then other people like have a long, slow ride, and then eventually it starts happening for them. I think it depends.
Lewis Black.
Chad Daniels, I think, is a good example.
Dude,
Who was
that
like under the radar
so
for a long time. He's
good.
great. And we all knew he was great like 10 years ago, but it's just now that like, I think mainstream America is starting to realize, because he's like great for like, he should be as big as like, I think like, Nate or Greg Warren. There's comics who I think are like great for like mainstream America.
Yeah.
I also love them and think they're great
Chad talks about like family shit.
Yeah.
And real family, being dad, being a husband, being an ex-husband, being, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's Carlin level good. Well,
He's
maybe
great.
maybe I don't know. I don't want to insult
Well,
Carlin fans by saying that. And Chad,
Carlin would never talk about family stuff. Is the only weird thing about that comparison. But he's very good.
But Chad Daniels is I watch him and go, God damn, how's he do
Chad's
that?
great. But so like, but I also think there could I know Chad a little bit, but there might have been some period of his life where he was like, this isn't working. Why am I not bigger? Why I think I'm putting out really good stuff, but no one seems to care that much. But he kept grinding, and now all of a sudden it's happening for him in a bigger platform way. And like I think that to me is like a lesson of also like, hey, just keep putting out good stuff, keep working hard, and like that's the stuff that you control, and don't get too obsessed with the stuff that you don't control.
I think you're ready for your Larry the Cable Guy moment.
Yeah, what's my catchphrase?
I think you need a character and a catchphrase.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Finisher quick. Has anyone done that? This is like finisher quick.
Too many syllables.
Damn, see, this is my problem. I went boutique. I went Michelin star.
That's right.
You can't have a Michelin star catchphrase. That's the problem.
Here's your sign. Okay, you bring this up in the special, so I'm going to ask you, why aren't you married?
Are you proposing?
I'm not proposing.
It's legal now, Paul. So,
if I'm going to cheat on my wife, it's not going to be with a dude.
Well,
no offense. No offense.
I'll try not to take that personally, but okay.
But if it were with a dude, it'd be with a bald white guy.
Thanks. Yeah, finally. We think
Is that better?
Think about how we could reproduce, and finally there'll be more bald white dudes who think they're funny out there. That'd be great. I don't know. I have a good answer for this. I don't know. I think I've chosen a path of, I've dated some wonderful women. I had opportunities to get married. I don't think the door is shut on that yet. And I guess I just never made it a priority in a way that I was willing to like, I guess it always seemed sort of like a sacrifice to me, or like I was giving up some part of myself that I wasn't willing to. And I'm probably like selfish. I think also if you want to get into it, like my parents both lived these like incredible, amazing lives when they were younger. And then my mom had this disease and wound up paralyzed. And then my dad had to take care of her and was like wound up having cancer. And so like later on in their lives, I felt like they were so, things were rough, but they appreciated how much they had lived life when they were younger and the adventures that they had that I think subconsciously in my head, it was like, you got to get out there. You got to like travel around the world. You got to make art. You got to like be in a band or do comedy or, and the opposite of that would be like settling down and having a wife and kids in the suburbs, and that like I think subconsciously represented death to me, and so in a way that I probably ran away from it. And then also maybe I'm really tough to date.
Yeah,
I might not be the easiest person to.
What would your
to live
therapist
with.
say? What would your therapist put your use your voice of the therapist?
I mean, I did do years of therapy.
Can we cut in the clip about your therapy?
Please, yeah.
Yeah.
Although I will say this, I feel like my therapist is kind of cocky. I don't know. Because I think there's something cocky. You go in and you sit on the couch, and right next to you is this giant box of tissues. It's kind of cocky. Oh, you're that confident that at some point in the next 45 minutes, I am going to start masturbating. Wow. Wow, dude. You're not that hot, all right? I can wait till I'm on the subway. All right, come on. It went too far at the end. We all feel the same about that.
I love that. Got the biggest LOL in the gym on the treadmill watching that.
That's my target. Treadmill laugh should
Me
be
and
its own
Equinox
category.
on 77th Street.
I think my therapist would say that I'm too picky and not willing to compromise, and just sort of, that being in a successful relationship means like not always getting what you want and giving up on, some of your own stuff. And I've been reluctant to do that.
You don't want to sleep with two French bulldogs in your bed? Wait, what did I say?
Are you
Did I
married
say
to two French bulldogs?
What's that?
Are you having a menage bulldog?
I'm a spectator in the whole bulldog farm that we have on the Upper West Side.
Bulldog Farm. That sounds like a punk rock band right there,
Yeah.
Also, I feel like this is skewed negative. I've managed to date. I've fooled a lot of like really sweet, beautiful, wonderful women into dating me, and it's been really fun, and I've had a good time, and that still seems to be on the menu. So I feel like I'm very fortunate and lucky, and in many ways living the dream. And maybe I don't need to get married, Paul. All right, maybe I'm doing fine. How about that?
Yeah, sounds like you're doing great.
Yeah, things
sounds
are
like
all right
you're
for
fine.
me. I'll show you some pictures afterwards.
Women love these true crime podcasts and documentaries, and then you're going out on dates with strange men that you meet on the internet. How did you decide that's a good combination? How did that happen? It's a bad idea, because then I don't like it, because then I went out on online dates. You got to walk in on defense. Like I went out on this online date. The girl's like, first thing she said, how do I know you're not some sort of serial killer? Oh my God, you've got the wrong idea about me. There is no way I am going to pay that much attention to you. All right? This is a lack of attentiveness special here. I don't know. It's a lot of ego to think that it's going to be that amazing to murder you, that I'm going to be willing to clean up a crime scene.
Tell me more about Bolo.
It's my new special, YouTube/Matt Ruby.
Yep.
I wear a bolo in the special. Thus
picked
it's
that
called
up.
Bolo.
I picked that
People
up.
are like, so you have a special relationship to bolo ties? You from Texas? I'm like, no. I'm just wearing a bolo. I like the word. I like the shape of the word.
Here's me. Title card, Bolo. Matt appears on stage wearing a bolo. I go, oh.
This is
That's how it's like. That was me making the connection.
Bolo. Well, you don't want to have bolo FOMO. That's what I keep telling people.
Okay.
So,
all right.
I like it. So we talked a little bit about substance. What I like about this is like a straight stand-up special, me telling jokes. I think I'm a really good comedian, and one of the things about substance was like I could point like bookers or whoever to it. It's like it starts with me like stumbling drunk and doing all this, smoking weed and stuff. That's like, I don't know, do I really want to book this guy? So I like that this is a special that's me performing at the peak of my powers, telling funny jokes, talking about relationships and politics and drugs and Israel and Jews and transgender stuff and all different kinds of issues, and bringing, I try to have a take that you haven't heard before on stuff, and I'm just proud of it. I think it's good, so go watch it.
If you like well-crafted, very thoughtful jokes, you'll love Matt's special, Bolo, available on YouTube. We'll put links to it in the show notes. We'll also link to your Substack.
Yeah,
Does
please.
that sound good?
Yeah. It's all at mattrubycomedy.com. But mattruby.substack.com is where the Rubes letter is located.
Well, congratulations on both these specials.
Thank you so
and
much.
The other two I haven't watched yet, but I'm going to go back in the archives.
All
It's
right.
two, right?
An album and then another special, yeah.
Okay. It's been fun to be in New York, get to know you a little bit better. Thanks for doing this.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.